Week of new material, we have film and obscenity. I'm going to pull together a couple of different ideas we've been looking at throughout the course of the term. First, the idea of obscenity. We now know that there's a narrow class of material defined by the Supreme Court in the Miller test, and we'll be looking at the Miller test again in a little bit more detail. But in other words, looking at a flip side of it, material that is legally obscene is not protected by the First Amendment. In other words, the First Amendment, we have the right to free speech, to say certain things, unless it's obscene. So anything that does not pass the Miller test means that it is not protected by the First Amendment, and therefore there's no constitutional safeguards in place for it. So if a film or a song were to be found obscene, then there is no constitutional safeguards to say, well, it's free speech. I can say what I want without the government intruding. If it's found to be obscene, the government may censor it. We also have the term indecent material. I tell you here that it's sexually graphic, often referred to as adult or sexually explicit material that is protected under the First Amendment. So in other words, obscene material does not have constitutional protections, but indecent material does. It can be banned to be kept out of the hands of children. It can be kept off of the radio, television broadcast, but it still does have certain First Amendment protections. And so we have seen this pretty recently with some rulings that have come down in different places. First, remember, we always go to the Miller test to decide if something is obscene. But if it doesn't reach the level of obscenity, it still could be deemed indecent. And a really good example of this is the Janet Jackson Nipplegate from the Super Bowl a couple years back. Right after that happened, immediately a huge amount of fines were placed on the network. There's huge discussions on putting in tape delay, the 7-second delay, so that if anything were to happen in the future with these live broadcasts, then it could be edited out, etc. When it went up through the court system, the court said that it didn't meet the Miller test, so it was not obscene. However, it did fall under indecent material, so that it was things that could be barred from television. But just because things can be doesn't mean that they should be, and it doesn't mean that automatic fines will go in. And so they're still litigating whether the fines will be held in place. Originally it was turned around and said no, the fines will be dismissed for the Janet Jackson case. But then there were a couple other issues that came up, and so they're still litigating that. But they're saying that it does not rise, just the fact that you have a nipple on television does not rise to the level of obscenity, but it does come to the level of indecent. So we do have these two levels that we're looking at, and as we start looking at film, we're also going to discuss a little bit of whether the material we're looking at is obscene or indecent. Another common term is pornography. How do you define pornography? I tell you that this term has no legal significance, although it is always used by your run-of-the-mill person. Your average person talks about pornography all the time. Politicians talk about it all the time. But what is pornography? And that's one of the questions that I have asked you to think about, because at the end of the day, it's very difficult to define. And in the famous words of a judge, I know it when I see it. That doesn't help us to come up with a definition. It can be anything from real obscenity to something that is indecent to something that just offends a particular viewer. So, to give you an example of the broad range, if we have two men kissing, many people, depending on the demographic you grab, they would say, oh, that's pornographic, we don't want to see that, even if it's just a regular kiss. If you ask a group of gay men, they're going to say, no, that's fine, there's no issue with it. But then if you show two people having sexual relations, that then goes up to the level of at least um, possibly offensive material, because you wouldn't want children seeing it, etc. But just the fact of two people having sex, is that automatically obscene? And so, where do we draw the line from indecent, obscene, to getting to another definition of pornography? Because all pornography is not necessarily obscene. All pornography is not necessarily indecent. So, legally speaking, the term pornography does not exist, simply because you can't define it. What we do use instead are the terms obscenity, indecency, etc., in order to define how offensive it is to a particular group at a particular time.